of their dead leader Soleimani. ISIS considers the Shia branch of Islam to be heretical and has targeted shrines and religious sites in Iran even in the past. Soon after the blasts, accusations flew thick and fast, with Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi blaming Israel for the explosions and warning that Tel Aviv would pay a heavy price. Soleimani, formerly one of Iran's most powerful men, was killed by a US airstrike at the Baghdad International Airport on the 3rd of January in 2020. Known as Iran's shadow commander, he was the head of the Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force, an elite unit that handles Iran's overseas operations and was deemed to be a foreign terrorist organization by the US. Meanwhile, the US military conducted retaliatory strikes in Baghdad on the 4th of January, targeting a militia leader held responsible for recent attacks on US personnel. A drone fired at least 2 rockets at a facility used by the Iraqi militia group Al-Nujaba in eastern Baghdad. The strike resulted in the death of 4 individuals, including a local group commander. The US military, facing frequent attacks in Iraq and Syria, justified the action to prevent a resurgence of ISIS. This follows previous retaliatory strikes in response to drone attacks by Iran-aligned militants. Now, as the Biden administration grapples with an increasingly tense and unstable situation in the Middle East, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is heading to the region this weekend for the 4th time in 3 months on a tour expected to focus largely on easing resurgent fears that the Israel-Hamas war could erupt into a broader conflict. With international criticism of Israel's operations in Gaza mounting, growing US concerns about the end game and more immediate worries about a recent explosion in attacks in the Red Sea, Lebanon, Iraq and Iran, Antony Blinken will have a packed and difficult agenda. His visit comes just days after a suspected Israeli attack killed a senior Hamas leader in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. While a White House spokesperson said nobody should be shedding a tear over his death, it could further complicate Blinken's mission. Antony Blinken's latest extended Mideast tour will take him to Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Israel and the West Bank and Egypt. Israel's war against Hamas is nearing the 3-month mark amid international concern that the conflict is spreading beyond Gaza, drawing in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, Hezbollah forces on the Lebanon-Israel border and Red Sea shipping lanes. The concern grew after a drone strike on Tuesday killed Hamas deputy leader Saleh al-Aruri in Beirut. There are growing fears that a full-scale Middle East war could erupt from the flames of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, even though a more expansive war will not be in the vital national interests of any of the region's major players. While key states and extremist groups appear to be walking right up to the brink, there's still hope that the economic, political and military consequences of an escalation will be a strong enough deterrent for these powers to stop short of an escalation. Almost every day brings another violent incident. Fighting is intensifying between Israel and another pro-Iranian group, Hezbollah, across the Lebanon border. In another alarming sign, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on Thursday told the US envoy to Israel that time was running out to create a new reality on Israel's northern border to allow residents there to return to their homes. In another alarming incident, US forces this week sank 3 boats belonging to Houthi rebels in the Red Sea following a series of attacks on commercial shipping. The US and around a dozen allies have launched a maritime task force to protect commercial vehicles in critical sea lanes in the area after some shipping firms sent their vessels on a longer, less economical route around Africa. Meanwhile, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has outlined a new stage of Israel's war in Gaza, a more targeted approach in the north and further pursuit of Hamas leaders in the south, while Israel seeks to free the remaining hostages held by Hamas. Under international pressure to shift to less intense combat operations and in the face of economic challenges, Israel has been drawing down its forces in Gaza to allow thousands of reservists to return to their jobs.
As Iranian mourners gathered near the site of 2 deadly explosions on Thursday, Islamic State claimed responsibility for the blasts that killed nearly 100 people and wounded scores more. In a statement, the militant group said 2 members detonated explosive belts in the southeastern city of Kerman on Wednesday. Crowds had gathered there to commemorate the death of top commander Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in 2020 by a U.S. drone strike. Tehran had earlier blamed the blasts on terrorists and vowed revenge for the bloodiest attacks in Iran since the 1979 revolution. A very strong retaliation will be handed to them, First Vice President Mohammad Mokhber warned. Similar condemnations came from President Ibrahim Raisi and the powerful Revolutionary Guards, as well as the top authority, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. With the evidence of the previous day's carnage still fresh in the streets of Kerman, the UN Security Council condemned what it called a cowardly terrorist attack. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for other attacks in Iran in the past, including an attack on a shrine in 2022 which killed 15 people, and twin bombings in 2017, targeting the country's parliament and tomb of the Islamic Republic's founder. Authorities have called for mass protests on Friday. That's when, according to state media reports, funerals for the victims are set to take place.
We have seen the public credit now that ISIS-K has taken for the attack in Iran. We're certainly in no position to doubt that claim by ISIS-K. Difficult to make a quantitative or qualitative assessment of their strength based on this event, this one event. I would just say what we said before, which is ISIS-K does remain a viable terrorist threat. Certainly they are largely based out of Afghanistan. That's where they headquarter themselves, and they continue to pose a viable terrorist threat to the people of Afghanistan and obviously to the region. It would be imprudent to say, well, based on this one thing, that means that they have exponentially improve their capabilities or their resourcing to a certain degree. I just don't think we're at that point. We've long said and maintained that they remain a viable terrorist threat. I haven't seen anything that indicates there's a direct link to what's going on in Gaza and with the attack in Iran. On the anniversary of Soleimani's death. I haven't seen anything tangible that would tell me that there's a link there.
Later today, Secretary Blinken will depart for his fourth trip to the Middle East since the terrorist attacks of October 7th, as well as to stops in Europe. Over the course of the next week, the Secretary will visit Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the West Bank, and Egypt for meetings with foreign counterparts and others. The Secretary will focus on a number of critical issues on this trip. First, he will discuss immediate measures to increase substantially humanitarian assistance to Gaza. The United States has played a critical role in unlocking humanitarian assistance for the Palestinian people, but conditions remain extremely difficult. The Secretary will stress the imperative of expanding and sustaining safe access for humanitarian organizations to deliver food, water, medicine, as well as for commercial goods to enter all areas of Gaza. Second, he will discuss with the government of Israel its ongoing military campaign against Hamas to ensure October 7th cannot be repeated, including plans to transition to the next phase of operations and how the steps Israel can take to better protect civilians and how to enable Palestinians to return to their homes and neighborhoods as fighting curtails. He will also stress to the government of Israel the need to do more to lower tensions in the West Bank. Third, he will discuss ongoing efforts to bring home the remaining hostages, including the American citizens who are still unaccounted for. The Secretary has no higher priority than the safety and security of American citizens, and he will not rest as long as Americans, along with Israelis and citizens of many other countries, continue to be held captive.
We're absolutely committed to achieving our war games, that is, destroying our war goals, destroying Hamas, releasing our hostages, making sure Gaza doesn't become a threat again, and also making sure that we can return our citizens in the north and in the south. And for that, we'll apply maximum power with maximum precision everywhere that's needed.
And finally, I can confirm that on January 4 at approximately 12 p.m. Iraq time, U.S. forces took necessary and proportionate action against Mushtaq Jawad Kazim al-Jawari, a.k.a. Abu Taqwa, who is a Harakat al-Najuba leader Abu Taqwa was actively involved in planning and carrying out attacks against American personnel. The strike also killed another Han member. It is important to note that the strike was taken in self-defense, that no civilians were harmed, and that no infrastructure or facilities were struck.
Let's now get you the latest on the menace and danger posed by the Houthi rebels in Yemen on shipping vessels in the Red Sea. A Houthi drone boat packed with explosives detonated in the Red Sea on Thursday but failed to cause any damage or casualties, according to the US Navy. The Yemen-based group continues its attacks in defiance of international calls to stop. The latest attack came one day after 12 countries, including the US, Britain and Japan, issued a joint statement cautioning the Houthis of grave consequences unless they halt their attacks. There have been at least 25 attacks by the Houthis against merchant vessels transiting the southern Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, forcing shipping firms to send their vessels on a longer, far more expensive route around Africa. The repeated Houthi attacks have increased pressure on US President Joe Biden to respond militarily, something his administration has been reluctant to do out of fear of escalating already soaring regional tensions. All right, on that note, let's take a quick break here on the show, but there's plenty more on the other side. Don't go away.
Ram's Ayodhya rebuilt. Ram Lala's Pran Pratishtha. Countdown to January 22nd. Dateline Ayodhya. Catch the mega coverage only on News 9 Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. It's been almost 3 months since the horrific terror attacks carried out by Hamas on Israel. Chilling details of the barbaric sexual violence that was perpetrated against scores of women that day have been emerging over the last several weeks. Now, Raz Cohen, a survivor of Hamas's 7th October attack, has shared some disturbing details of the rape and murder of a woman he witnessed. Cohen, who was attending the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel with his girlfriend, says he witnessed the gruesome rape of a young Israeli woman who was brutally murdered by 5 men. The 24-year-old says he saw 5 men get out of a white van while he was hiding after Hamas operatives attacked the Israeli music festival. The men caught a woman, pulled her clothes off, and one of them began to rape her. He then took a knife and killed her. He continued to rape the dead body. Cohen says the men were laughing throughout. They always laughed. I think it was for fun. They murdered a lot of people for fun. I still remember her voice. Screams without words, he says. The terror group then attacked a couple, and both were killed with knives and an axe. Feeling like he was on a firing range with bullets coming from all directions, Cohen says he ran across the open desert field. He had to wait for 9 hours in the bush for rescuers to arrive. His girlfriend Maya was also killed that day. A combat paramedic reported seeing the bodies of 2 teenage girls in kibbutz Be'eri, claiming that at least one of them had been raped. There were telltale signs all around. There was also a bullet wound in the back of her head and a puddle of blood. Scores of such horrific stories have emerged since the 7th of October, when women were raped, brutalized and butchered by Hamas terrorists. Surging ocean freight rates have followed Maersk ship incident, halting Red Sea transit since Suez Canal trade route plans. Many ships are sailing around the southern tip of Africa, which is a much longer voyage that dramatically increases costs. Here's the story.
Prices to move cargo by ship are surging again following new attacks on vessels in the Red Sea. Houthi militants based in Yemen have been targeting freighters in the area since November. They say it's a show of support for Palestinian Islamist group Hamas in its conflict with Israel. Recent days saw a fresh missile attack and the attempted hijacking of a ship operated by cargo giant Maersk. That has forced firms to suspend plans to restart routing vessels through the area. Instead, many ships are sailing around the southern tip of Africa, a much longer voyage that dramatically increases costs. Asia to North Europe freight rates more than doubled this week as a result. Washington has been trying to assemble a multinational naval task force to combat the problem, but with limited results. On Wednesday, US Ambassador to the United Nations Chris Lu renewed calls for joint action, and he singled out one country for much of the blame.
Iran has long enabled these attacks by the Houthis. Beyond Iran's long-standing provision of financing to aid such Houthi operations, since 2015 it has transferred advanced weapon systems to the Houthis, including unmanned aerial systems, land attack cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles used in attacks against maritime vessels.
As much as 1/3 of all global container traffic flows through the Red Sea to or from the Suez Canal. The attacks threaten to delay deliveries for major retailers like IKEA and Walmart. And the soaring costs could soon mean higher prices for consumers too. Freight rates from Asia to the US have been less affected, however. That's because some cargo destined for the US East Coast can be sent straight across the Pacific to the West Coast instead.
An Indian naval warship today issued a warning saying abandoned ship to pirates as it reached the cargo ship MV Leela Norfolk that was hijacked on Thursday evening near the coast of Somalia. The hijacking was reported by the UK Maritime Trade Operations, a British military organisation that tracks movements of various vessels in strategic waterways. Around 15 Indian crew members are aboard the ship in the Arabian Sea. The Indian crew on board are in fact safe, and Marine Commandos Marcos have boarded the ship and secured these 15 Indians on board. That is what the Indian military officials have said. Naval warship INS Chennai, a Navy destroyer, launched its helicopter and issued a warning to pirates to abandon the hijacked vessel. Last month, the Navy deployed several warships into the sea to maintain a deterrent presence after a string of recent shipping attacks, including a drone attack near India's coast, was blamed on Iran by the United States. The latest attack comes at a time when many vessels have been rerouted from the Red Sea, where Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels have carried out drone and missile attacks in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, where Israel is battling Hamas. Last month, a drone attack hit the MV Chem Pluto tanker 200 nautical miles off the coast of India. In other news, according to US intelligence officials, Russia has acquired ballistic missiles from North Korea and is seeking close-range ballistic missiles from Iran as Moscow struggles to replenish supplies for its war with Ukraine. That's what the White House has said. Recently, declassified intelligence found that North Korea has provided Russia with ballistic missile launchers and several ballistic missiles, according to the White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby. Russian forces fired at least one of those ballistic missiles into Ukraine on the 30th of December, and it landed in an open field in the Zaporizhia region. Russia launched multiple North Korean ballistic missiles on Tuesday as part of an overnight attack. The missiles have a range of about 550 miles. US intelligence officials believe that North Korea, in return for its armed support, wants Russia to provide it with aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, armored vehicles, ballistic missile production equipment, and other advanced technologies. Kirby also said that while a Russia-Iran deal has not been completed yet, the US is concerned that Russia's negotiations to acquire close-range ballistic missiles from Iran are actively advancing. The US intelligence findings support South Korea's assessment that North Korea has increased its cooperation with Moscow. South Korea's military had said in November that it suspected North Korea had sent an unspecified number of short-range ballistic missiles and tank missiles, as well as portable anti-air missiles to Russia, in addition to rifles, rocket launchers, mortars, and shells. The Biden administration has repeatedly sought to make the case that the Kremlin has become reliant on North Korea and Iran for the arms that it needs to fight its war against Ukraine, and has disclosed intelligence findings which it says show exactly that. North Korea and Iran are largely isolated on the international stage for their nuclear programs and human rights records. In October, The White House had said North Korea delivered more than 1,000 containers of military equipment and munitions to Russia. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un travelled to Russia in the month of September to meet President Vladimir Putin and visited key military sites there. John Kirby has also said the US would raise its concerns about the arms arrangement findings at the UN Security Council and would look to impose fresh sanctions against North Korean and Iranian individuals and entities facilitating weapons transfers with Russia. Meanwhile, President Putin has issued a decree allowing foreign nationals who fight for Russia and Ukraine to obtain Russian citizenship for themselves and their families. The order says people who have signed contracts during what Moscow calls its special military operation in Ukraine can apply to get Russian passports for themselves and their spouses, children and parents. They must provide documents showing they have signed up for a minimum of 1 year. A declassified US intelligence report says the Ukraine war has cost Russia 315,000 dead and wounded troops. That's nearly 90% of the personnel that Russia had when the conflict began.
Our information indicates that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea recently provided Russia with ballistic missile launchers and several ballistic missiles. On the 30th of December 2023, Russian forces launched at least one of these North Korean ballistic missiles into Ukraine. This missile appears to have landed in an open field in the Zaporizhia region. And on January 2nd, Russia launched multiple North Korean ballistic missiles into Ukraine, including as part of its overnight aerial attack. We're still assessing the impacts of these additional missiles. These North Korean ballistic missiles are capable of ranges of approximately 900 kilometers. That's about 550 miles. This is a significant and concerning escalation in the DPRK's support for Russia. Now, in return for its support, we assess that Pyongyang is seeking military assistance from Russia, including fighter aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, armored vehicles, ballistic missile production equipment or materials, and other advanced technologies. As for their inventory now, again, I want to be careful here, but I would just put it this way, that we haven't seen anything that would tell us that Russia is not still reliant on munitions and missiles from North Korea.
Ukraine is considering changes to its rules on army mobilization amid the ongoing conflict with Russia. A parliamentary committee convened to review proposals that could increase the number of people eligible for conscription and impose stricter sanctions for draft evasion. Here's a look at the controversial nature of these proposed changes and their potential impact on the conflict.
As war with Russia drags on, Ukraine is looking at possible changes to its army mobilization rules to enable Kyiv to call up more fighters and get tougher on draft evasion. Let's take a look at what the proposals involve. Ukraine declared martial law in February 2022 when Russia invaded and began mobilizing civilians into the army. There was an influx of volunteer fighters at the start, but the numbers have since dwindled. Last month, President Volodymyr Zelensky said the military had proposed mobilizing up to 500,000 more people.
This is a very serious number, and I said that I need more arguments to support this idea. This is a question about people, about justice, about defense capabilities, and a financial question.
To beef up reserves, the proposed bill suggests lowering the mobilization age for combat duty from 27 to 25. It's also sparked controversy with tough penalties on draft dodgers. They could face restrictions on property transactions and be banned from traveling abroad or driving. They could also be denied loans and state services. A separate draft bill proposes sharply raising fines for those who flout the mobilization law and prison terms of up to 5 years for those who refuse military medical examinations. Another change is to go digital. The proposal wants to let draft officers call up people by email or some other electronic platform instead of issuing call-up papers in person or sending them to people's homes. Right now, the military can't call up those who live abroad. The bill proposes tracking Ukrainians living overseas and requiring them to have up-to-date military registration. If it becomes law, consular services, such as the issue of passports, would require citizens to present their military registration documents. One proposal close to families' hearts is demobilization, since there's no time limit on wartime military service now. The bill suggests discharging soldiers who have served for 36 straight months during martial law, though the army chief has said this will only be possible if there is no escalation on the battlefield and Ukraine has enough reserves ready by 2025 to replace troops. Before any of these changes can come into effect, they have to be approved by Parliament and signed off by Zelensky. The proposals have faced criticism from the public and some politicians, with Parliament's Human Rights Commissioner saying some of them are unconstitutional. Lawmakers are expected to debate the bill's first reading as early as next week.
Time for us to take a quick break here on Global Lens. Don't go anywhere. There's plenty more on the other side.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है मनी9। आजादी पैसे की। अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Ram's Ayodhya rebuilt. Ram Lala's Pran Pratishtha. Countdown to January 22nd. Dateline Ayodhya. Catch the mega coverage only on News 9 Live.
Pakistani spy agency ISI's sinister plan to target India. Training women to honey trap top civil and military officials. Counter honey trapping ops initiated by India. But gullible victims still caught in the web. Top military intelligence experts break down the web of deception. Colonel Hani Bakshi explains the phenomena of honey trap.
जहाँ पे भी आपको लगेगा, उनको लगेगा कि there is a person who is susceptible to women, who is making a lot of women friends on the social media. That is where they will make a spoof account and then start luring the person.
Colonel Pavitran Rajan decodes the psyche of the victim and the predator.
But when you go up the chain, no one enforces it to people at the top. That disciplinary regime and the security regime is not enforced at the top. And they usually have a public profile where it is much more easier to approach that person.
A News 9 special on how modern technology has added teeth to the ancient spying tactic.
Our story takes you inside Pakistan's honey trap machine.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back. You're watching the Friday edition of Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Prime Minister Narendra Modi wrote to Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida following the earthquake in Japan on the 4th of this month. He told his Japanese counterpart, and I quote, "I'm deeply anguished and concerned to learn about the major earthquake that struck Japan on the 1st of January. I express my deepest condolences to the bereaved families of those who lost their lives. We stand in solidarity with Japan and its people affected by the disaster. As a special strategic and global partner, India values its relationship with Japan and is ready to extend all possible assistance at this hour." Rescuers in Japan are rushing to find 242 people who are missing after the devastating New Year's Day earthquake. A critical 72-hour period to find survivors from when the quake struck ended late on Thursday. The death toll from the 7.6 magnitude earthquake in the remote Noto Peninsula has now risen to 92. Japan's self-defense forces have doubled the number of troops participating in rescue and relief operations to 4,600. Many people are believed to be trapped under their collapsed homes, mostly in the towns of Suzu and Wajima. The wooden structures were not built to withstand powerful earthquakes that frequently plague Japan. Tens of thousands of residents are still without power and water, while hundreds remain isolated from help because of landslides and blocked roads. We will not give up, that's what Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said today after a meeting with disaster response officials. And staying with news from Japan, crews at Tokyo's Haneda airport began clearing the charred wreckage of a Japan Airlines plane from a runway as investigators sought to retrieve the aircraft's cockpit voice recorder and discover what caused the deadly accident a few days ago.
Crews have begun clearing the charred wreckage of the Japan Airlines plane at Tokyo's Haneda airport. The Airbus A350 jet collided with a Coast Guard aircraft on the runway. All passengers were safely evacuated from the airliner, but 5 out of 6 personnel on the smaller Coast Guard plane were killed. Officials say the flight data recorder from the Airbus has been recovered, but the cockpit voice recorder has not yet been found. The wreckage should now be removed by Sunday and will then be inspected by Tokyo police. Transport authorities want to establish why the Coast Guard plane entered the runway as the airliner was landing. Local media reports say police are looking into possible professional negligence. The captain of the Coast Guard plane, the sole survivor, is under close scrutiny. Transcripts from the airport's control tower appear to show that he was told to stop short of the runway before the crash occurred. Haneda is the world's third busiest airport, and authorities say it was at full capacity at the time of the incident. Reuters has reported that the Coast Guard plane was flying its third mission within 24 hours. It had been transporting people and supplies to support recovery efforts in the region of Japan's recent earthquake. Now experts say multiple safety procedures must have failed for the accident to occur. They will also be looking closely at the catastrophic fire suffered by the Airbus plane. It's the first such blaze on one of the new generation of jets, which are largely made of carbon composite materials instead of metal. Aviation safety experts say the fact that the plane held together long enough to get everyone off should renew confidence in the materials.
In other news, India remains the fastest growing large economy and its growth is projected to reach 6.2% in 2024, according to the World Economic Situation and Prospects 2024 report published by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Though India's growth is projected to reach 6.2% in 2024, it's slightly lower than the 6.3% estimated for 2023. This year's growth will be supported by robust domestic demand and strong growth in the manufacturing and services sectors, the UN report says. Meanwhile, China is facing headwinds from a struggling property sector, though government-led infrastructure investments are partially offsetting the shortfall in private investments. In contrast, India registered strong investment performance in 2023, driven by government infrastructure projects and multinational investments. In the third quarter of 2023, the Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, a leading indicator of economic activity, was in contraction territory in all of the world's largest economies except India. Investment has been more resilient in developing economies compared to developed economies. Investment in South Asia, particularly in India, remained strong in 23. India is benefiting from growing interest from multinationals, which see the country as a key alternative manufacturing base in the context of developed economies' supply chain diversification strategies. The income shares of the top 10% increased in a large number of developing countries that received substantial capital inflows, including South Africa and India. Climate change-related events continue to have an adverse impact on the region last year. Droughts intensified considerably during July and August, affecting most of India, Nepal and Bangladesh, while Pakistan recorded above average rainfall. In India, August was one of the driest months in 4 decades, impacting the production of key staple crops in the most affected areas. Against the backdrop of lingering risks and uncertainties, global gross domestic product growth is projected to slow from an estimated 2.7% in 2023 to 2.4% in 2024. While the world economy avoided the worst-case scenario of a recession in 2023, a protracted period of low growth looms large. Growth is forecast to improve moderately to 2.7% in 2025, but will remain below the pre-pandemic trend growth rate of 3%. South African former Paralympic star Oscar Pistorius was released on parole today, nearly 11 years after murdering his girlfriend in a crime that shocked the world. Pistorius, dubbed Blade Runner for his carbon fiber prosthetic legs, shot 29-year-old model Riva Steenkamp dead through a locked bathroom door on Valentine's Day in 2013. He has repeatedly said he mistook Steenkamp for an intruder when he fired 4 shots into the bathroom at his Pretoria home. He launched multiple appeals against his conviction on that basis. 37-year-old Pistorius has spent about 8.5 years in jail and 7 months under home arrest before he was sentenced for murder. A parole board decided in November that he could be freed after completing more than half his sentence. In a statement shared by the Steenkamp family lawyer, Riva's mother, June Steenkamp, said, "There can never be justice if your loved one is never coming back, and no amount of time served will bring Riva back. We who remain behind are the ones serving a life sentence." She added her only desire was to be allowed to live in peace. A monitoring official will keep an eye on Pistorius until his sentence expires in December 2029. Pistorius will have to inform this committee if he seeks job opportunities or moves to a new address. He is also required to continue therapy on anger management and attend sessions on gender-based violence as part of his parole conditions. South Africans have had mixed reactions to his release, with some feeling Pistorius has served his time, while others see his punishment as too lenient. Oscar Pistorius was once the darling of the sports world and a pioneering voice for disabled athletes, for whom he campaigned to be allowed to compete with able-bodied participants at major sports events. In August 2012, mere months before shooting his girlfriend, Pistorius became the first double amputee to compete at the London Olympics, where he made it to the 400-meter semi-finals. He won 2 gold medals at the Paralympics.
Former Paralympic star Oscar Pistorius will be released from prison on Friday. He was granted parole nearly 11 years after killing his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp. Here is a look at what will happen to him after his release under South Africa's so-called restorative justice program. Pistorius was granted parole on November 24th last year after he served half of his 13 years and 5 months sentence for murder. He is expected to live in Pretoria and will complete the remainder of his sentence in the country's community corrections system under the supervision of South Africa's Department of Correctional Services. He will be assigned a monitoring official who will have to be kept informed when Pistorius is seeking job opportunities or moving homes. He will also have to attend programs on gender-based violence and continue therapy sessions on anger management, according to a lawyer for the Steenkamp family. Prior to his parole, Pistorius participated in the restorative justice program. The system was introduced after the end of the apartheid to deal with apartheid-era crimes in a more participative and reconciliatory way. It is based partly on how indigenous cultures handled crime long before Europeans colonized South Africa, aiming to find closure rather than merely punishing perpetrators. An integral part of the program is a victim-offender dialogue, where parties affected by a crime come together to try and achieve closure. Pistorius and Riva's late father participated in the victim-offender dialogue on June 22nd in 2022. In the run-up to the parole hearing, Riva Steenkamp's mother, June, released a statement saying she was not convinced Pistorius had been rehabilitated. However, she said she had no objections to his release. After Pistorius was granted parole, June Steenkamp lauded the parole board's efforts in involving the victims. Pistorius' lawyer and family did not comment.
A second batch of court papers connected to late sex offender and financier Jeffrey Epstein has been released by a New York court. They were unsealed a day after 900 pages were disclosed following an order by a U.S. federal judge. The documents were part of a case against Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's imprisoned former girlfriend. The court records unsealed on Wednesday and Thursday both contain references to the UK's Prince Andrew and former US President Bill Clinton. New York Judge Loretta Preska ruled last month that there was no longer any legal justification to withhold the names of more than 150 people mentioned in a 2015 defamation lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre, an Epstein accuser, against Maxwell, a former British socialite. Among the previously detailed claims against Britain's Prince Andrew is that he sexually abused a minor in London, New York and on Epstein's Island in the Virgin Islands after the teenager was told to do it by Maxwell. The Duke of York has already denied these allegations. The new documents include a suggestion from a lawyer for Virginia that former US President Bill Clinton may have information on Maxwell and Epstein's activities because he had traveled with them. Clinton has acknowledged being a former associate of Epstein and taking flights on the financier's private jet, but has denied wrongdoing or knowledge of his crimes. There is no suggestion of illegality by Clinton in any of the documents. In another file, a 2011 email exchange between Giuffre and a former Mail on Sunday journalist Sharon Churcher. Giuffre claims Clinton walked into the Vanity Fair magazine office and threatened them not to write sex trafficking articles about his good friend J.E., that's Jeffrey Epstein. In the email threads, Churcher and Giuffre also discuss the latter's attempts to secure a book deal. One email shows Giuffre emailing a library agent to pitch a book she is writing titled The Billionaire's Playboy Club. She describes the memoir as a woman's story of glitz, glamour, sorrow, compassion and true love. It was never published but submitted in court as evidence. In another email thread, Churcher and Giuffre discuss an approach from Vanity Fair magazine to buy a photo from Giuffre. The Mail on Sunday journalist advises Giuffre to say she has no more to disclose at the time but how she was allegedly sex trafficked to two of the world's most respected politicians. The alleged politicians aren't named in these email threads. In another court filing released on Wednesday, an accuser identified as Jane Doe 3 alleges she was trafficked by Epstein for sexual purposes to many other powerful men, including numerous prominent American politicians, powerful business executives, foreign presidents, a well-known prime minister, and other world leaders. Jane Doe 3 has previously been named in media reports as Virginia Giuffre. The documents shed more light on the scope of Epstein and Maxwell's illicit activities. In a 2016 deposition, Joseph Ricare, a police detective in Palm Beach, Florida, says that approximately 30 women had spoken to him about performing massage and work at Epstein's home in the beachfront community. He says Maxwell was involved in recruiting the girls to give massages at the mansion. Ricare testified that the majority of the girls were under the age of 18. When asked about Epstein and how he was able to gain access to so many underage girls, the detective said each of the victims that went to the house were asked to bring their friends there. When they went to perform a massage, it was for Epstein's sexual gratification. Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution from a minor in 2009 and took his own life in 2019 while awaiting trial over sex trafficking charges. Maxwell, the daughter of publishing tycoon Robert Maxwell, is currently serving a 20-year prison sentence for her role as a recruiter for Epstein. All right, let's now get you some news from India's neighborhood, starting with Pakistan. Pakistan's Senate has approved a resolution to delay the general elections that were slated to be held in the country on the 8th of February. The upper house of Pakistan's parliament approved this resolution today. The session was attended by just 14 of the 97 senators, with one member voting against the resolution. The pushback demand was made because of the prevailing security conditions in Pakistan. Another reason cited was the cold weather. The resolution moved by independent legislator Dilawar Khan. In the resolution, Khan said Pakistan's Interior Ministry has conveyed serious threats to the lives of prominent politicians and highlighted an increasing number of security incidents, mainly in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan provinces. He said the harsh winter makes it difficult for the political parties to campaign, which might also affect the voter turnout in these elections. And finally, let's get you an update on the Bangladesh elections that are scheduled to be held this Sunday. An opposition boycott looks set to usher Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to a fourth straight term in the Bangladesh polls this weekend. The election has been described by the opposition as a sham designed to cement Hasina's rule. The opposition, BNP, staged a month-long protest campaign in 2023 demanding the Prime Minister's resignation that saw at least 11 people killed and thousands of the party supporters arrested. They say it would be inappropriate for the party to participate in an election with a predetermined outcome. Rights groups have warned that the country of 170 million is heading for a virtual one-party rule. While the United States sanctioned Bangladeshi security forces in 2021 over allegations of rights abuses, and other countries have also voiced their concerns about the conduct of this week's vote. Hasina, in power since 2009, has repeatedly vowed that the election would be credible after observers said previous polls won by her party in 2014 and 2018 were marred by irregularities. Go to the polling stations and cast your votes in the morning to show the world that we know how to hold a free and fair election. That's what Sheikh Hasina told a campaign rally. With the ballot outcome all but assured, however, some voters see little reason to turn out. Many argue there is no charm in voting this time as Sheikh Hasina is going to stay in power. Votes in the South Asian nation's 12th general election since gaining independence from Pakistan in 1971 are expected to be counted on Sunday evening, with results due early Monday. About 120 million registered voters will choose 300 members of parliament in this election. Women make up almost half of the voters, while those casting a ballot for the first time number 15 million. As we said, the principal opposition party, the BNP, is not contesting these elections because Sheikh Hasina refused to accept their demand to cede power to a caretaker government in the run-up to these elections. Troops have fanned out across Bangladesh to guard the polls, in addition to nearly 750,000 police officers, paramilitary and police auxiliaries. The police have stepped up arrests of BNP leaders and workers after the deadly protests that took place in the country in October. The risk of political violence is high despite low expectations for voter turnout, according to the International Crisis Group, an independent think tank. Now, in her last 15 years in power, 76-year-old Sheikh Hasina has been credited with turning around the country's economy and the garments industry, but critics have accused her of authoritarianism, human rights violations, crackdowns on free speech and suppression of dissent, with some of them being jailed. Her main rival and two-time Premier, BNP leader Khaleda Zia, is effectively under house arrest on graft charges. The opposition says that these are all trumped-up charges. Khalida's son, Tariq Rahman, is the acting chairman of the party, but he's in exile in London after several charges were brought against him, charges that he denies. But Bangladesh's economy has also slowed sharply since the Russia-Ukraine war boosted prices of fuel and food imports, forcing the country to turn to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout of $4.7 billion last year. Well, that's all we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great weekend ahead. Do join us again on Monday.
On October 27, 2023, the world awakened to a new crisis. A new turn in a 70-years-old civil war. One that has grave implications not just for India, but also regional stability in Southeast Asia. Today, News 9 looks at the mayhem in Myanmar. For decades, Tatmadaw, Myanmar's military junta, held the nation in a tight vice-like grip, but not anymore. Myanmar is undergoing a seismic shift as a coalition of ethnic rebel groups known as the Three Brotherhood Alliance launched Operation 1027. A series of coordinated offensives challenging the military junta's rule. This alliance, consisting of the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, the Tang National Liberation Army and the Arakan Army seeks to overthrow the military regime. Over the course of the last month, the rebels overran large parts of the country, seizing towns and military outposts. According to analysts, rebels now control over 50% of Myanmar, and the military-installed President Min Aung warning that Myanmar is in danger of breaking apart.
The Three Brotherhood Alliance, comprising rebel groups like the MNDAA, the TNLA and the Arakan Army, have been successfully challenging the military junta's rule. They've made significant territorial gains in coordinated offensives. Now, reports suggest that the junta is now restricted to just a few large cities. And at the moment, the military still has the edge when it comes to air power. However, the Tatmadaw army, the Burmese military, appears to be extremely short on manpower, supplies and ammunition. They're holding out now for a long and bloody struggle.
The conflict that now rages in Myanmar has its origin in one moment. On the morning of 1 February 2021, Myanmar's democratically elected ruling party, the National League for Democracy, was deposed in a coup. But the junta was not entirely successful. Resistance to the Tatmadaw survived in the form of a national unity government, the People's Defence Forces, and a number of ethnic rebel groups. Now it appears that the opposition forces have united. Geopolitical dynamics, ethnic tensions, and historical grievances are all playing a role in the present conflict.
Chairman Min Aung staged a coup and he didn't have the election as he promised. He said, within 1 or 2 years he will have a new election. But until now, about 3 years passed, still no election.
The junta's actions in the past 2 or 3 years haven't really helped. But the truth is, Myanmar has always had a sort of fractured polity. The northern part of the country is home to almost a dozen rebel groups who've been waging their own independence struggles for over 70 years. But what's different now, today, is the fact that the rebel groups are united. And for the first time in history, there's a concerted effort to defeat the junta. The alliance has been gaining ground through strategic coordination, exploiting vulnerabilities in the military's control. It enjoys support from anti-junta factions, and this is what's led to these territorial captures. And then there's, of course, the China factor. It's no secret that Beijing was extremely unhappy with the rise of Chinese crime syndicates on the Myanmar-China border. And despite Chinese pressure, the junta, it appears, took no action. Now, the fact that the rebels now appear to have China's blessings doesn't seem to be a coincidence.
It is part of the Golden Triangle, where traditionally there are a lot of sources of instability. There are drugs, guns running, those kind of things. And China is also equally affected because of this security dynamics that is going on inside Myanmar.
See, China has always had an influence in Myanmar with all parties in that country. In other words, China has had an influence with the government in Myanmar, and it has also been arming, funding, keeping certain insurgent groups under its control. So this is part of the game that China is playing.
The implications for India are particularly worrisome. According to a UN report, over 26,000 Myanmar nationals have sought asylum in India, seeking refuge from the conflict between the rebels and Tatmadaw. Now, for the first time, soldiers from the Myanmar military are crossing over into India as refugees. The influx, especially into border states like Mizoram and Manipur, raises humanitarian concerns and poses security challenges for India. Furthermore, a protracted conflict in Myanmar could impact Indian infrastructure projects such as the Trilateral Highway and the Kaladan Multimodal Transit Transport Project.
Absolutely. It's not only India, Bangladesh or Thailand. It is also affecting the entire region. There are boat people from Myanmar, they are reaching up to Sri Lanka. There are boat people trying to escape from Myanmar to Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. So it's a regional issue, I'll say that. Everybody is suffering.
India wants to develop relations of harmony with each of its neighbors in an atmosphere where there is mutual trust and where mutual interests are safeguarded.
India must navigate the crisis delicately. It needs to address the refugee influx, it's a big priority. Balance diplomatic relations between Myanmar and China, that's why it's at the tri-junction. It needs to safeguard its regional interests, infrastructure projects, let's not forget, and security. A nuanced and strategic approach is essential to mitigate political risks and contribute to regional stability.
Since the last 2 years, Khalistani terror groups are threatening Indian diplomats in Canada, US, UK and Australia. Investigations of these threats led us to the first ever abduction and killing of an Indian diplomat, Ravindra Matre, in UK's Birmingham in 1984. Our months-long investigation finally led us to the murderer of Ravindra Matre, who has been hiding in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir for the last 40 years. Watch our exclusive documentary, Murder of an Indian Diplomat, where we reveal the man who killed Ravindra Matre.
Stop searching, start streaming. Download the world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
Welcome to the News 9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News 9 Plus. Here are the top 9 headlines today. The Supreme Court has rejected a plea against an Allahabad High Court order dismissing a PIL demanding the recognition of Mathura's Shahi Idgah Mosque site as Krishna Janmabhoomi and the removal of the mosque. The Indian Space Research Organization has successfully flight tested a fuel cell intended for space use. This is a monumental leap for India in space power generation. During the test, 180 watts of power was generated from hydrogen and oxygen. The Home Ministry has ordered a CBI probe into the AAP government's Mohalla clinics. This follows the Lieutenant Governor's recommendation based on a report by the Directorate of Family Welfare on alleged malpractices at the clinics. The clinics were launched in 2000.